Hi guys, my name is Robert, and on behalf of RadarBusters, we're pleased to bring you another video. This one is about the new Alpha-17 Laser Defender Laser Jammer from Taiwanese Microwave Group, or TMG. It's December 8th, I think, which is a Thursday, December 2022. And after a few weeks of re-engineering, about a month actually, I guess, we were pleased to be able to get, I think, which is the first unit of the production Alpha-17, which is a successor to the very popular Alpha-15, which has been on sale now for a couple years. Just to give you an update on TMG, they were a company that was a distributor for them. They shut down. I think that was TMG Americas. And Ming, who is the primary person over there in Taiwan, asked RadarBusters to get involved and help continue to bring the product and support in for the TMG product. So RadarBusters is pleased to do that. And as we were getting involved with the company, Ming had indicated that they were going to do some re-engineering. So I wanted to show you what the new retail box looks like. And here it is, the Alpha-17. You may recognize it. It was redesigned a little bit. And let's open it up and we'll see what we have here. Of course, we have the revised manual, and this is the primary CPU. It also has the connectors for all of the laser transponders and the power cord, things of that nature. It's also got the menu options here, which we'll go over a little later when we get into our test of the unit. So that's that. Now, Ming sent us a dual unit with a VPR head, and now with the 17 versus the 15, actually Ming redesigned the laser transponders to actually have two laser diodes. So while the previous heads, the Alpha-15 heads, had those two bubbles to represent where two diodes would have gone at the time, the transmitting diodes, you can see now they're actually being utilized. So this is the revised head. This is the receive section here, and these are the two bubbles that you see here for the transmit function, or the jamming function of this laser defender. It's a nice, well designed, and the thing that's nice about the TMG heads, as y'all are probably already familiar with the Alpha-15, this is a replaceable head. And actually, that's a pretty important thing. Over time, these things can get worn just from the sun and driving and all that stuff that hits the car, micro debris like sand and things of that nature that gets kicked up on the road. So, and of course, if the heads get scratched, just like your lenses, it's going to diffuse the light. It's going to make them less efficient. So this is a really nice feature of the TMG, that you can actually replace these, and they're not that expensive. So that's something to consider. They come with the two heads, right? And as I say, we got the additional head, which is the variable pulse rate particularly. And you can tell it's got a red connector to differentiate it from the black connector, which are the standard heads. And you can see here, interestingly enough, there are no bubbles here. So this serves a different function. Now, Ming tells us that when you're mounting these heads, you want these at least, this center head, or the VPR head, in the center of the two transponders, the typical transponders, and you need to have these at least 2 inches higher or lower than the two heads. So I think he tested higher, but again, it can call for being higher or lower. And we're going to test on the same vehicle that we did the previous test of the TPX jammer, the new jammer that also had 3 heads. So we'll see how that comes out. So that's that. So we have the 3 heads, and that's what they come packaged in. And then we have extension cables. So, you know, the heads don't really have that much. These are short, but you'll be able to get an extension cable with 2 of these to connect to the CPU module. And then, of course, you have the mounting brackets. In this case, since the CPU is designed to be mounted inside the vehicle, you have a cigarette power adapter, 12 volt, to connect. Now, some of the newer cars don't have cigarette lighters, like the Corvette C8. They're all USB. Don't ask me why, but that's what they're doing. So you're going to have to have a special mount to be able to do that, like a hardwire kit or whatever. But this is nice because it has a quick power button. You can shut down the unit if it's in an area that you can get to. You've got your fuses, you've got some ties, you've got some couple mounting brackets, and a level, because you want these heads pointing straight and level. And some of the, most cars actually have a little bit of a curvature to the front of the vehicle, the bumper. And you don't want to make that flush, those heads, with the bumper, because what's going to happen is they're actually going to point out a little bit. So it's going to maybe look a little funny on the vehicle, but you want those dead straight and level. And that's what you have that little level for. And that's basically it. The transponder, now, you know, it's interesting. And I had spoken to Ming about this. One of the things I think I would like to see in this, and it would have to be redesigned potentially, or if they can make it wireless, is to have the ability to potentially mount this inside the hood area, in an area that's secure, maybe close to the fuse box or where you have your electronics. That's what the TPX can do. And what that would simplify is the ability to run a cable, a single cable through the firewall. And at this point, you're going to have to run multiples to get this to the box. So it's actually the connectors for the head, is the CPU module, but it's also the control module where the speaker is. So you're going to, it's, you know, depending on the vehicle, you're going to have to mount this in a place that, you know, is going to be able to give you easy access and potentially be able to see. And in here you have the rear. If you put the rear sensors on or transponders on, you're going to get the indication of the rear if you're targeting from the rear. Very rare. I've never really used the laser jammer with rear heads. I think in all the years I've been driving with, since the LiDAR has been out, which is like from '92, I think I've seen about only 2 times, maybe 3, in all the laser counters that I have coming from the rear. Now, there may be areas that you all drive where that type of targeting is more common. You're going to have to know. Believe me, if you're getting a jammer, you're probably going to know enough about laser, maybe even the type of laser that's used in your normal routes of travel. But for the most part, the vast majority of the targeting is going to come from the front. This has got Bluetooth, and there are a couple applications available. JBV1, which can communicate with this, as well as the Valentine, and then TMG's own product, pretty basic, to control and connect via Bluetooth on your phone. And that's available in both the Android and Apple, and I'm pretty much an Apple user, so that limits me to that. So anyway, what else can I say about this unit? Several years ago, we tested the Alpha-17, right? And you'll see that video. In fact, I'll put a link to that older test in the description of this video. And that was only a 2-head system. And we tested against all the current laser guns, the ProLaser 4, the LTI SXB, the Stalker RLR, which was a very early version of that gun. It's a more waterproof version used for outdoors than the XLR was. But that's also a variable pulse rate gun. And then the Dragon Eye Compact. And actually on the vehicle that we tested, it was only 2 heads. And we actually found that it jammed extremely well. And we actually added a little veil. You'll see that on the test, to take care of the headlights. And I think, if I recall right, the punch through on the Dragon Eye was less than 100 feet. And, you know, there's a lot of talk and a lot of hype online, the forums, about jam to gun. But the reality is, you have to consider, when you're driving, if you're on the highway, you're going 70 miles an hour, you're covering about 110 feet per second, right? So 200 feet is less than 2 seconds. 300 feet is less than 3 seconds. And you just don't see generally that kind of targeting that close. It becomes, when they're on the side of the road, you begin the co-side angle as the angle basically increases from the front of the car that's being targeted to the targeter, who's typically on the side of the road. The speed will drop as a result of that, which favors the driver. And, the time it takes to aim on a car and it's moving, the relative closure rate and angles are going to change more rapidly the closer. So I actually consider anything under 300 feet basically a jam the gun scenario in the real world. You're just not going to be having to jam a vehicle or a cop at super close distances. It's just not even practical. So we found the Alpha-17 to be, very, very good right out of the box. Now, since the time we did that test, they came out with an updated CPU module and a variable pulse rate head, that third head. So the idea is that with that extra head, it actually brings the closure rates, down. Now, to me, it's an academic thing, and I think probably the vast majority of drivers are going to just do fine on a two-head standard system. And in fact, we're going to test both ways. We'll test like we did the Alpha-15 with the standard heads. We'll incorporate the third head, again, with that mounting difference, which is required, and we'll retest on the guns that we're getting those punch-throughs at far, which is probably going to be the RLR or the Dragon Eye Compact. So we'll see what impact that extra head has. As I say, Ming redesigned these heads with the 2 laser diodes, and we're going to see what impact that's going to have insofar as coverage or jamming effectiveness, either at the long range or close. Now, I should say, regardless of whether you have a single diode or a dual diode, the idea of more power, yeah, that sounds good on the surface, but the reality is you got to have a good algorithm. And if the algorithm isn't right, it doesn't really matter how much power you're pushing out. That's not the issue. It's the algorithm to cancel those pulses and predict those pulses in such a way that the laser gun that's targeting you cannot get a speed reading, okay? Insofar as use of these products, of course, you don't want to jam the gun. Unfortunately, many years ago, an individual did that repeatedly, made videos in Texas, and they became aware of the capability. It was just not a good thing to get involved with law enforcement in that matter, and Texas came out and created a ban for that in Texas. So and there are other states now that ban laser jammers. So you may want to look at your laws and see what the fines are. If you're in Australia and you're using a jammer, let alone a radar detector, the fines are astronomical. And you really got to make that calculus if it's worth it for your citations. So you got to get to know your laws. Again, if you're doing a laser jammer, you're probably more of an advanced user anyway, and you're going to know your electronics. But again, it's prudent to look into the laws and see what they are. The price point of the Alpha-17 starts at around $800. RadarBusters is having a sale through the end of the month. Convinced Ming to do that. He was pretty easy going about that, and we have a sale running, pre-sale, if you will. We expect the jammer to become available by the end of December, and so we expect those to be delivered, and we hope RadarBusters hopes to be shipping them perhaps a couple days after Christmas, depending on the time it takes to get from Taiwan. So be sure to get your pre-orders if you're familiar with that. Now, the weather here is going to be deteriorating. We're going to be getting some snow in the high country. Temperatures dropping here pretty significantly so in the coming week. So we're probably going to do the actual test 2 weeks from now. So or maybe a week from now. So we'll just see how the weather is. We'll see how that goes. But we'll have a follow-up video that has the test with this with this jammer. And so far as I started talking about the price point, this is about 50% less expensive than the ALP, which is a highly regarded jammer. And again, it's an academic thing, to be quite honest with you, in having a jam-to-gun performance. I just think there's a lot of hype about it, but realistically, the practical driving, you're not going to have to worry about that. The other thing that's also not really discussed is the context of these advanced lasers. The Dragon Eye has less than 1% of the market share of all laser jammers, less than 1%. So it's really a minute representation of the guns you're going to see. And they tend to be in pockets. They're not statewide contracts. When you think about it, Kustom and Stalker and MPH to a lesser extent with their radar units have contracts with the state. So adding on a laser gun, police LiDAR, is very easy and simple to do in those because they already have the contracts. They already have them negotiated. Dragon Eye is a small company based out of Gwinnett County, outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and they don't have that ability or that leverage, if you will, to ride on with a larger contract. So it's very small use. Stalker, again, the RLR, not a cheap piece. You'll probably see more XLR and RLRs, but the vast majority of laser guns that I've encountered all around the world, Australia in particular, Kustom, ProLaser 4s, they're popular, LTI to a lesser extent, but I think the vast majority, I see a lot of Kustom lasers out there, and this jammer will have no problem jamming that. The Escort laser shifters, they're about $1,000 for a two-head system, so they're about 30% more. And the TPX, which we really like too, it's a simple system out of the box, is about 30% less than the TMG. So it's priced pretty much in between of the three lower priced, the ALP being the outlier, and of course the Stinger, which is another outlier, which is the custom install piece. So again, very competitively priced, and we understand from Ming that this should give us a higher level of performance than the Alpha-17, so we're looking forward to that. Hey guys, we wanted to add some more information to our ERV review since we did our installation and then our tests. So we learned some more information and we had some experiences, and I wanted to put that in the context of the overview of this new jammer, the TMG Alpha-17. Let's start with the heads. As you probably already know, the new heads, the Gen 4 heads, actually now have 2 diodes each, where the previous heads only had 1 diode. So actually the diodes are not set to fire at the same time to increase output or more power, light beam down the field. What it actually is designed to do is one is polarized horizontally, and then the second one is polarized vertically. And the whole idea there is that it should do better when you're mounted horizontally for an overhead shot. So they are expecting to increase the jamming field of view, if you will, for those types of encounters. Also, it's interesting that, for the BMW owners, you would tend to mount at least the 2 standard heads vertically in the kidney grille of the BMW, and that may have come at somewhat of a penalty since it was only polarized horizontally, and when you flipped it, it may have compromised some jamming performance, on the horizontal plane. So the expectation is with 2 diodes, 2 different polarizations, that effect really won't any degrade in performance, at least vertically, should be mitigated by the fact that there are 2. And the same for the horizontal, that it'll do better on the off axis on the higher elevation. So another interesting dynamic as a result of that is the actual aggregate sum of the average, if you will, the output of these 2 diodes in each head is actually lower than what it was when you're overdriving, or I shouldn't say overdriving, but driving the single diode harder. So they were able to reduce the output. Still plenty to do the jamming, as we understand, but it actually should make the diode have a longer lifespan, and even perhaps even reduce the electrical demands of driving that head. So that's going to be an interesting improvement. And for some of you who have those vertical mounts or have encounters overhead, like from an overpass, hopefully you'll see that actually those performance increases. The head placement, this is important. And this is something for everybody to consider when you're going to be installing this or configuring it to be installed on a vehicle. The two standard heads are recommended to be basically pretty close on the same plane horizontally, but the recommendation is to have them at a minimum. The previous recommendation for the Alpha-17 heads, Gen 3 heads and what have you, was 20 inches minimum between the two. And the concern there is there's interference potential from the one head being picked up by the other, and then some kind of feedback mechanism. We added to a third head, which is the VPR head. So we did some tests with the standard 2 heads against the guns, and then we did a retest with the 3 heads against the variable pulse rate guns. And one thing we found is that even at 20 inches in separation, 16 to 20 inches in separation between the variable pulse rate head, which was lower, off the angle to the standard transmit heads, we were getting a feedback and interference which would impact the jamming performance adversely against the VPR guns. And in one case with the Dragon Eye, only the Dragon Eye, it would continuously alert even when the signal you weren't targeting anymore. So it was like feeding back on itself, and it was just jamming and jamming and jamming, even though the signal wasn't there. And it was interesting, it didn't happen on the RLR, didn't happen on the PL4, and it didn't happen on the LTI gun, so just the Dragon Eye. So what we ended up having to do is remount the heads to give us the distance that, stabilized and prevented that from happening. So we got to around 23 inches, and that is about the farthest we could separate that VPR center head from the two transponders. So we actually even had to move the heads out even further, and then move the VPR head from the upper part of our air dam to the lower part of the air dam to get that distance. Now, also TMG is recommending at least a 2-inch difference in elevation between the horizontal plane of the standard heads with the VPR head, either above or below. And we were perhaps about 12 inches in total when we made our final adjustments. Something to be concerned about, or be considerate of, is when the head is that, we had to put it right down on the bottom of our air dam in the skirt there. And on this car, it's a pretty low car to begin with. So when the head is that low, I think you have to be concerned about the potential reflections or feedback that it could get being so close to the ground. And that's something to be mindful of. The other thing we found too is by being so low, you're going over a bump, or you hit a curve, or any of those types of things, a driveway incline. And when that head is right on the very bottom, that could present an issue for damage, or at least bumping it and then changing the orientation of the head. So just something to be mindful of. Again, in our experience of testing this, the head placement seems to be more critical and sensitive to having the proper geometry, let's say relative to the TPX jammer we tested not too long ago with the 3 heads, and they seem to be much more tolerant of placement and without adversely affecting performance. So just something a little finicky, a little tricky with the TMG, something to be aware of. Something else, and we're going to have another video to describe that. We came up determined that we had some issues with that third head. And we're going to detail that on another video, since we believe it's going to be a short-term issue that's being addressed. We already fed it back to TMG. They're going to be looking into it, and our expectation is it's going to be resolved before they ship the unit. So we're going to have a follow-on video. I'll put the link down below this video. We'll also post it on our Facebook page, and then we'll do that as a separate video and talk about that content. Getting back to the unit itself, the CPU has been has had some improvements in the electronics for stability and potentially overdriving. Now, even though there are 3 connections that can be split to 2 heads each, and then 2 additional VPR heads, that would allow potentially the use of 8 heads total. And the TMG is not recommending that you do that. They're not saying it won't work, but there could be concerns that there's just too much driving of those, heads, having an 8 total. So they're really recommending a maximum of 6 heads. So the 4 standard heads, either 2 in the front, 2 in the rear, what have you, and then up to 2 VPR heads, 1 in the front, 1 in the rear, and that's about it. Don't go any more than that. The VPR head has a flat lens, and it only transmits, we understand, it's got 2 diodes in it, and the reason it doesn't have the bubbles that you see on the other heads is because they believe it improves and increases the performance of that head when you get closer, particularly with the variable pulse rate gun. So that's really what that VPR head is going to accomplish. But again, based on our experiences, one has to consider if you're going to configure your vehicle, if you have a smaller car like a Civic or a Rio, it may not call for a VPR head, at least at this point, and you may want to stick with just 2 heads. So having that third head, if you can't get that, excuse me, that distance, and I'm recommending at least 24 inches. If you can't get that distance, I would advise you, at least for now, until we learn otherwise or see otherwise, not to use that third head, that VPR head. Other observations I'm going to share with you. Interestingly enough, the way these heads are, this is a VPR head, and let me get the standard head. This is a standard head, and if I take these, oh, here's another standard head. Okay, we have this standard head, and below this you have writing, which talks about the FCC ID, and then you see the label here on the back, which warns you, tells you what kind of laser device it is, class 1M. Interestingly enough, you'll see here the receiver side and then the 2 jamming diode heads here. TMG is recommending that the receiver side is actually closer to the headlight. Now, intuitively, I would have thought that the jamming heads, if it's got enough detection sensitivity, that I would tend to put these on the inside, away from the headlights, and put the jamming heads, the diodes, closer to the headlight. But TMG tells us theoretically they would recommend and maybe get better performance with the receiving side closer to the headlight. Although in practice they don't think there's really a difference, but that was the standard recommendation. However, with that in mind, the head orientation, when you keep the writing the same, either on the back so you can read it, or underneath the head, what I would call underneath the head where you see the other writing, if you put them both in the same orientation, the receiving side is on the left side or on the right side, depending on how you set it. So, I assume that could work as well, but to keep it consistent, to flip it, either to have the receiving on the outside closer to the headlights like TMG is recommending, or putting them on the inside and having the jamming diodes closer to the headlights. Either way, you're going to have to actually have one flipped, and it's going to look a little, you know, you're thinking, well, one has to be upside, what appears to be upside down, because the writing is going to be in a different orientation. Now, I shared that feedback with TMG. They may revise that, and effectively then you have one head for one side, one head for the other side. But for now, just keep that in mind when you mount. If you want to keep the receiving section or the jamming section in the same configuration relative to each headlight, one's going to have to be flipped and mounted. Okay, so that's that. What else can I tell you? The other thing I noticed here with the CPU module itself, the tolerances, in my opinion, could be a little improved. So when you plug, this is the, it'll either be the splitter cable that has the two standard heads or the end of the single cable for the VPR head. When you plug that into one of these ports, and I'll just pick TP1 here for now, and I'm not going to push it all the way in, but if you push it all the way in and it, you know, basically clicks, it's very hard, you know, you can't use your finger to push that top to pull it out, and you don't want to force it, obviously. So I had to get a little tiny small flathead screwdriver to be able to get in there gently, push that, and then be able to pull it out. So that's one observation. The other thing, insofar as tolerances, which I wish could be improved, and again, we fed this back to TMG, hopefully we'll see those improvements, is these dip switches, which will control up these two ports, either to be front or rear. You can program it or you know, configure it in such a fashion that you can change the front or rear, which is good for the directional if you want to know the front and rear, if you have the rear. So you can configure that, and then it's all consistent. But getting in there again to flip these dip switches is extremely difficult. It's really close when they're in the off position, which is actually the up position, or you know, default to the rear, because when you push them down, it's to the front. But when they're in the up position, you really can't get to it. So once again, you have to use I use the flathead screwdriver, very small, to get in there to pop them down, to push them down. So that's something else. Another observation I'm finding is, and it's a little unsightly, that this connector here, as you can see, the wires are exposed. The jacket only goes to a certain point. And while TMG tells us that they're durable and that's not going to pull apart, it gets me a little concerned and nervous. If you've ever had an iPhone, you know, where you plug in the lightning port and you have that flexible, how many times have you had to replace that when the outer jacket, you know, sort of fails, and then the wires are exposed and eventually it doesn't? I just think it could potentially put undue stress on this over time, particularly if you move it. Now, if it's mounted and you're not going to move it, hey, okay, don't have to worry about it. But at any rate, I think that's an area, at the very least, aesthetics and appearance, and perhaps even functionality and durability long term. So something else to consider. One other thing here as it relates to connection of these, and this is actually, again, counterintuitive. When you plug the, let's say you have a dual-headed system for the front only, which is a popular configuration, and you have the tail end of this at the splitter cable of the two heads, my inclination would be to plug this into TP1 naturally. These are numbered, TP1, TP2, TP3 for the different connectors. And my natural inclination is, okay, well, it's the first set of heads, it's in the front, I'm going to plug it into the TP1. Well, actually, when I started targeting it, it was indicating alerts to the rear, and I look more and I see here that these dip switches that can program the ports to either be front or rear were default in the rear section, which is why it was alerting to the rear. So actually, if you left those ports in the same default position, up, it would actually make sense to plug the first set of heads, the standard heads, into the TP3. And we recommended those to be renumbered. I think it's just a little bit more consistent. We'll just be aware of that when you plug that in. that you want to get it in the TP3. And then the VPR head for the front, we just plugged it into this one. So we have the TP3 and the VPR head, which gave us the 3 heads. What else can I say about this? This thing can be powered several different ways, actually 3 different ways. There is a power cable which gives you the ability, if you wish, to use a cigarette lighter fused with a push button to quickly turn it on and off. And that connector plugs into the side, and then you've got your power. That's simple enough. There's also a hard wire kit that can be wired, and then in that case you'd plug that into the power section through either through the battery directly or through a fused switched box, either way. But you have 3 potentially different ways. Now, there have been some observations or feelings in the past that this system wasn't as stable or being connected to a switched port. TMG doesn't believe that to be the case. However, they have increased the fuses on both the hard wire and the cigarette lighter to 3 amps. And with the head power reduction in the way the heads are firing now with a little less power, plus improvements to the electronics for reducing noise inside the unit, electrical noise, RF noise type thing, and stability of power, it really shouldn't matter. So time will bear that out with more users in installations and the feedback that you get from using this in operation. Other than that, I think that takes care of the heads and the receiver, or the CPU. The Bluetooth app, we worked with that, paired it, although we have the latest firmware and algorithms. You pair it with your phone. I actually have an iPhone. The Bluetooth pairing, interestingly enough, you turn on your Bluetooth, you see the device. If you try to pair through the settings menu of the iPhone, it will fail to pair. So you actually have to turn your Bluetooth on and then fire up the app that you get off of the Apple or Android stores, so to speak, and run that, and then pair it through the app, and then you have the ability to update firmware, update algorithms right by the phone. And you can also change the sleep modes and the jam times as well. So you have the ability to configure some of those options with the app. So if you have the get the system, you want to check that out. The components from the Alpha-15 are not really compatible with the 17 from an electronic standpoint. Not recommended. There really is no upgrade path. I think the recommendation from TMG is if you want to get a new system, you got to get the new system, the CPU, the heads, just to be on the safe side. Now, as a result of that, we recommended or suggested that perhaps if there's not a physical upgrade path, to offer an incentive for those who have already purchased the Alpha-15 from a cost perspective. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but we made the recommendation, and we'd like to see if we could get something put together for you guys who have the Alpha-15. So to be determined in the future. So anyway, hope you've liked this overview and found this as informative. If you wish, please subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube. We're going to have more content, including our tests. And then we're going to have that follow-on video, as I indicated earlier. And we'll put the links to those when we get them produced under this video. They'll also be on our Facebook page on RadarBusters Facebook. You're going to see those links, and you'll get more information about our experiences with our test. And that's about it. So we wish you well. Thanks for watching. And as we always say, drive safe, drive smart, and most importantly, drive protected. Take care, guys.